Red Bull may have just uncovered the upgrade that saves their entire season. And for Max Verstappen, this changes everything. Because after one of the worst starts of his Red Bull career, the team is arriving in Canada with a secret RB22 package that insiders believe could finally unlock the car Verstappen has been begging for since the start of 2026. The timing could not be bigger. For races into the season, Red Bull is already 150 points behind Mercedes. Verstappen has looked frustrated, uncomfortable, at one point, even questioning his future in Formula One itself. And now suddenly, everything points toward Canada. Because Miami secretly revealed something terrifying to the rest of the grid. Not in the final result. In the telemetry. Behind closed doors, Red Bull reportedly discovered the first real clues about how to fix the RB22 under the brutal new 2026 regulations. Now the team is bringing targeted upgrades to Montreal designed specifically for Verstappen's biggest problem. Confidence. Front wing changes. Floor and diffuser refinements. Mechanical suspension adjustments built for violent braking zones and aggressive chicanes. That sounds technical. But for Verstappen, this could mean the difference between fighting for 5th place or terrifying the entire championship again. Because when Max Verstappen trusts a Formula One car, the grid changes instantly. And Canada may become the first moment all season where Red Bull finally gives him that feeling back. But here's the part nobody can ignore. If these upgrades work, the team everybody thought was collapsing could suddenly become the most dangerous threat in Formula One again. At first, Red Bull believed the RB22 would continue the dominance of previous years. Instead, it became one of the most confusing cars the team has built in the modern era. Not because the car lacked speed completely, but because nobody inside Red Bull could fully trust what the car would do from one corner to the next. And for Max Verstappen, that is a nightmare. Because Verstappen's entire driving style depends on confidence. Late braking, aggressive turn-in, maximum commitment at the edge of grip. He drives Formula One cars almost like somebody balancing on a tightrope at full speed. Tiny instability becomes massively dangerous when you attack corners the way Max does. That is exactly where the RB22 started failing him. According to reports, the car suffered from unstable aerodynamic balance, especially in fast corners under the new 2026 regulations. That sounds technical. But imagine running across ice where the ground suddenly changes underneath your feet every few seconds. You stop trusting your movements completely. That is essentially what Verstappen has been fighting inside the RB22. And the deeper problem became even worse. The car reportedly struggled to extract the full potential from the Honda power unit because of airflow problems around the rear diffuser and difficult thermal management. In simple terms, the engine had power available. The car simply could not use it efficiently. That combination created a disaster early in the season. Retirement in Australia. 8th place in Japan, his worst result in years. Outside the podium in Saudi Arabia. And even when Verstappen briefly led in Miami through strategy, he still only finished 5th. For most drivers, those results would look acceptable. For Max Verstappen and Red Bull, they felt catastrophic. Especially after years of domination. But here's where the story becomes much more emotional than people realize. Because the frustration inside Verstappen reportedly became so intense that after Japan, he admitted he was considering retirement at the end of 2026. That statement shocked Formula One completely. Not because people believe Verstappen suddenly stopped loving motorsport, but because they believe he stopped loving these new Formula One cars. According to reports, Verstappen dislikes how dependent the cars became on electrical deployment, and how much slower and less rewarding they feel in fast corners under the new regulations. And honestly, that frustration explains a lot. Because Verstappen built his reputation driving with instinct, aggression, pure confidence. The new regulations changed the personality of Formula One itself. And Red Bull adapted slower than Mercedes or McLaren. That is the hidden crisis nobody expected from Red Bull entering 2026. Not simply losing performance, losing identity. But Miami may have quietly changed everything. Because according to Red Bull insiders, the most important result from Miami was not Verstappen's finishing position. It was the data. For the first time all season, Red Bull reportedly began understanding what the RB22 actually needs under this regulation era. And now Canada becomes the first true test of whether that understanding is real. Because the upgrades coming to Montreal are not random. Every adjustment appears focused on one mission. Giving Verstappen confidence again. Front wing optimization for better balance in chicanes. Floor and diffuser refinements for more stable ground effect performance. Mechanical setup changes designed specifically for Montreal's violent braking zones and aggressive curbs. Those details matter enormously for Verstappen. Because when the car finally feels predictable, he becomes terrifying again. And Formula One has already seen glimpses of that transformation before. The question now is whether Canada becomes the weekend where Red Bull finally wakes up, or the weekend where the cracks inside the RB22 become impossible to hide anymore. But here's where the entire Formula One paddock starts getting nervous. Because Canada is not simply another race for Red Bull. This is the first real pressure test for the RB22 project itself. And inside the garage, everyone understands the stakes. If these upgrades work, the entire season changes instantly. If they fail, the crisis around Red Bull could become impossible to contain, especially around Max Verstappen. Because behind the scenes, the emotional tension inside Red Bull is already enormous. After years of domination, the team suddenly finds itself in reconstruction mode. That is not a normal situation for Red Bull engineers. This was the team that used to arrive at race weekends expecting victory automatically. Now they arrive in Canada hoping simply to confirm they are moving in the correct direction. That shift changes the psychology of everybody inside the organization. And maybe the biggest pressure falls directly on Pierre Waugh. Because replacing Adrian Newey was always going to feel impossible. Newey's cars usually behaved naturally, aggressively, predictably at the limit. The RB22 reportedly went in a completely different direction. A bold micro-aerodynamic concept. Slim sidepods. Multiple small aerodynamic solutions working together instead of one dominant philosophy. On paper, it sounded brilliant. On track, it became unstable. And instability is poison for a driver like Verstappen. That is why Miami mattered so much emotionally inside Red Bull. Not because 5th place was impressive. It was not. But for the first time all season, the car reportedly showed signs of consistency the team could finally analyze properly. That telemetry became more important than the result itself. Because understanding the problem matters more than temporarily hiding it. And now Montreal becomes the ultimate reality check. This circuit is completely different from Miami. Canada punishes instability brutally. The walls are close. The braking zones are violent. The chicanes require absolute confidence from the driver. There is nowhere to hide an unpredictable car at Gilles-Villeneuve. Especially not for Verstappen. Because Max drives with instinct more than almost anyone else on the grid. He attacks curbs aggressively. He brakes impossibly late. He rotates the car with tiny corrections that demand complete trust in rear stability. If the RB22 still behaves unpredictably under braking or direction changes, Canada could become a disaster very quickly. But if Red Bull finally solved even part of the balance issues, then suddenly, Verstappen becomes terrifying again. And Formula One knows that feeling very well. Because Verstappen at full confidence changes races psychologically before they even begin. Drivers take fewer risks around him. Teams panic strategically. Pressure spreads instantly across the grid. That is exactly why rival teams are paying close attention to Red Bull's smaller upgrades in Canada. Because sometimes the most dangerous Formula One improvements are not massive visual changes. They are tiny adjustments that suddenly unlock driver confidence. And according to reports, that appears to be Red Bull's entire philosophy for Montreal. Not a revolution. A recalibration. A way to reconnect Verstappen with the car again. That is why the Nürburgring detail matters more than people realize too. During the break before Canada, Verstappen chose to race in the 24 hours of Nürburgring instead of stepping away from motorsport entirely. That decision revealed something important. The passion is still there. The problem is not racing itself. The problem is whether Formula One still gives Verstappen the driving experience he actually enjoys. And Red Bull knows that. Which is why Canada may become one of the most important weekends of Verstappen's entire career. Not because of championship points, but because Montreal may answer the question nobody inside Red Bull wants to face openly yet. Can the RB22 still become a car worthy of Max Verstappen? Or is Formula One watching the beginning of a much bigger separation between Red Bull and the most dominant driver of this generation? And this is where the story becomes dangerous for the rest of Formula One. Because if Red Bull finally fixes the RB22's balance problems, the championship could explode back to life overnight. And rival teams know it. That is why Canada suddenly feels much bigger than a normal race weekend. Not because Red Bull is expected to dominate immediately, but because Montreal may finally reveal whether the team found the correct direction after months of confusion. And honestly, the timing could not be more dramatic. Mercedes arrives under FIA pressure surrounding its controversial engine system. McLaren is rising quickly after Miami. Ferrari remains consistent but still lacks total control of the championship fight. And suddenly, Red Bull senses opportunity. Not because they are leading the standings. Because chaos is beginning to spread across the top teams. That creates openings. Especially for Verstappen. Because Formula One has seen this pattern before. When Max Verstappen reconnects emotionally with a car, the transformation is immediate. Lap times improve instantly. Confidence returns. Aggression returns. And suddenly, the entire grid starts reacting differently around him. That is exactly what Red Bull is trying to unlock in Canada. Not raw speed alone. Belief. And the scary part is that Montreal historically rewards Verstappen's greatest strengths perfectly. Late braking. Aggressive commitment. Precision between walls. Confidence through unstable surfaces and violent chicanes. The Gilles-Villeneuve circuit feels almost designed for drivers willing to attack the limit without hesitation. That is why the suspension and mechanical setup changes Red Bull is bringing matter so much. Because if the RB22 finally becomes stable under braking and predictable over curbs, Verstappen could suddenly look like the Verstappen Formula One remembers best. And that possibility terrifies rival teams more than the championship standings themselves. Because right now, Red Bull's position in the Constructors' Championship looks terrible. 4th place. 150 points behind Mercedes after only 4 races. But inside Formula One, teams understand something important. Points early in a regulation era can become meaningless if one team suddenly solves its concept before everyone else. That is exactly why Canada feels like a turning point. Because Miami already hinted the RB22 may not be fundamentally broken after all. The data reportedly showed progress. The upgrades exposed weaknesses, yes, but they also revealed solutions. And that is incredibly important in Formula One development. Sometimes understanding the problem is more valuable than immediate results. That appears to be exactly where Red Bull is now. Searching for clarity. Searching for stability. Searching for the version of the RB22 they originally believed they created. And if Canada confirms that direction, then the second half of 2026 could become completely different from the first. Because Verstappen's frustration is no longer the only story here. The entire future of Red Bull's project is tied to this moment now. Pierre Wache's philosophy. The post-Newey era. The long-term future of Verstappen himself. Everything suddenly feels connected to what happens in Montreal. And maybe the most fascinating part is this. Verstappen does not need the fastest car immediately to become dangerous again. He only needs a car he trusts. That is what makes this situation so important. Because confidence for Verstappen works like a multiplier. Give him stability. And he extracts performance other drivers cannot even imagine. That is why rival teams are watching Canada so nervously. Not because Red Bull already solved the RB22, but because Formula One is starting to fear they finally understand it. And if that happens, the team everyone thought was collapsing may suddenly become the most dangerous car on the grid again just as the championship starts opening up.